All right, welcome to Humble Pie. We're joined again by our friend Dawen, and today we are going to talk about politics. There's this expression that we used to have, I think, growing up, where like religion and politics don't mix, and politics were kind of this subject that was kind of uncomfortable to talk about or a little taboo to talk about. But nowadays, if you look at media or social media, politics seems to be everywhere and everybody has an opinion on it. So I thought that we would take this chance to kind of talk about our stance on politics and the state of politics nowadays and religion in politics, and especially Christianity in politics. So I'll go ahead and let Dawen start again. And why don't you kind of just share a little bit about your stance on politics and your thoughts on the state of politics nowadays?
You know, whenever I think of the word politics, I think of when I was really young. I would listen to my parents talk about it, and then I'd say something like, politics is boring, it has nothing to do with me. And then I remember being reprimanded by my sibling who was 8 years older, and he said, you might not care about politics, but it has everything to do with you. So the more that you are aware of it, the more it can benefit your civic life. Those are his words. So, and I really think of that now when everything is so polarized in 2020. We were just speaking earlier, I've been reading this idea for the last 2 years. There's this idea that there's no longer a shared popular culture in America or in any country, really, because of the internet. Everyone just wakes up on and consumes things that they like individually. So if you sit on a bus and there's 40 people with 40 phones, all 40 people could be enjoying 40 completely different things that don't interact with each other. But what's really fascinating about politics now is that, at least to me, I find that politics, not that it's a unifier, but it's something that everybody is forced to contend with. And it affects everyone, and because everyone is so polarized, politics seems to be the issue that everyone at least has an opinion on. It's harder and harder to stay indifferent and apolitical in this day and age, especially when there's so much going on everywhere in the world, in every country and in every nation.
So how would you identify yourself, if I can ask that, in terms of politics or political affiliation?
From using American vocabulary, I've always felt that a two-party system could never really describe how I felt. I never felt like that the terms left or right, Republican or Democrat accurately depicted me. If I really had to describe my my attitudes, it would be, and I say this carefully because it seems to have also been turned into a negative word. I seem to be more central or centrist, which is to say that at times I've felt like a very conservative liberal, and at other times I felt like a very liberal conservative. But the point being, at some point these terms fail to be very useful. I do know that I value, at least as an American, I value the system that the Constitution that I learned in school and the ideals that it represents. But I do know that having just two parties more and more seems like a big failure on our part. So that's where I stand at the moment.
So now, Drew, so I've asked this question to many a pastor, and every single time I ask, it's like Neo dodging bullets in the Matrix, man. Like, I never get a straight answer from any pastor that I ask. So I'm gonna kick it to you and see if see how you're gonna do with this question. So where do you stand, man? Like, what are your views? What are your views on politics?
Yeah, I'm the guy to ask, man. I'm not one to dodge. So I would just say, from a church standpoint, as a pastor, that it's important to not use the Bible to for any sort of political agenda. And so I think church, in particular the pulpit on Sundays, is the primary purpose is to help people to know God, and to as the greatest commandment says, Matthew 22:37, love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. And your neighbor includes people of all different political affiliations, race, personalities, nations. And so, but it is, as Dawen said, it's quite the challenge. I know many pastors fail at that attempt, imposing their own opinions and their own convictions. Honestly, all pastors need a lot of prayer with that, including myself. So as I find myself like being tempted to use the platform to try to sort of influence on a political level. But I do think it's important to help people to think through what is in line with the heart of God, but not use Christianity or religion to influence on a political level. So it takes a lot of self-control to actually restrain yourself.
So not really coming out with the actual like definitive like where you stand in terms of politics.
Yeah, honestly, I think people would be disappointed. I'm one of those that used to think I knew something about politics, and then actually talk to somebody that knew their stuff. I realized that I shouldn't be talking about it. And so for me, I don't like being, I'm very against the partisan nature of American politics, obviously. And I would just say that I'm pessimistic towards government. I'm pessimistic towards institutions. I'm asking myself the question is, how can I influence and not be so sort of almost like anti-politics, anti-government? Because I think I've been so disappointed. In fact, I've changed positions on all different things. I don't even feel like I have a category that I can fit in. And as soon as you kind of try to, define yourself, obviously you get judged, or there's a lot of assumptions placed on you for who you are. But if I were to define myself, I would say it is possible to be conservative morally, but liberal socially. And I would look to Jesus as sort of the model. I strive to be conservative morally, but liberal socially. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Okay. Yeah, great. I think for me, like what you were just describing, what you wanted to stray away from or not be is actually what I am. I'm pretty cynical in terms of when it comes towards politics. So I would categorize myself as apolitical. And so I just I feel like disappointed that how a lot of issues that we would consider, I think, moral issues or issues of the heart are now political issues, and people take sides on those issues according to kind of what party they participate in or they affiliate with, and what kind of legislation or systems are built around those particular issues. And so I think that's kind of the disappointment that I felt. And so I am aware of politics. I am aware of what's going on, but I try not to really get involved in it whatsoever. But I think moving on, talking about what you mentioned, the polarization of politics nowadays, it seems that things are moving away from kind of Dawen, that's kind of what you expressed, more of a centrist platform, to very polarizing. So I kind of wanted to get both of your thoughts on this polarization of politics and kind of why people have kind of moved to such an extreme to maybe what we consider, quote unquote, the left or the right.
As a relatively young person living in this age, I feel like it used to be where you could talk to someone with a different opinion civilly, and it wouldn't be that difficult, and maybe you guys could even go share a beer afterwards. But now everything has been turned into this strange zero-sum game. I posit that I believe this, and if people don't believe it, then it almost feels like, well, I don't want to have anything to do with you, and I've made this moral judgment of you as a person. That's how it feels. And so people, once they discover they have opposing views, cease dialogue and don't talk with each other anymore. They don't extend their hand over the aisle. They don't even want to think why someone could have a different opinion. And I think that's toxic. I'll just say it. I found I see it all the time whenever Trump uses anything to speak, whether it's Twitter or his White House press briefings. And then I will say that at least one parallel from Taiwan and America is that the role of the media in either enlarging an issue or blowing it out of proportion or exploiting an aspect of it to promote ads. Yeah. So yeah, I think people are easily not led astray, but it's very easy to wake up and look at your phone and think, wow, this is to think of issues that are not black and white as being in black and white, and I think that's dangerous, and it drives me nuts. It seems like nuance as a word has been eliminated from the dictionary. No one knows what it means. No one has any intention of engaging with it, and no one is interested in any subtlety of opinion.
I mean, Drew, you're much closer than we are, I think, on the ground in terms of living in America, interacting with more Americans than we do living here in Taiwan. So what are your thoughts kind of being in the middle of all of these different discussions and what people are saying?
Yeah, I find that it's very frustrating having a conversation because it's not just a simple thing anymore, like two kids on the playground just meeting each other without any assumptions or biases. As a leader, I want to promote a sort of for more purity in the way that we see each other. And I think this two-party system is just killing dialogue because y'all remember WWF, with the wrestlers. Like I used to watch Monday Night Raw, Thursday Night Nitro. It almost feels where the whole system is set up that way. Where okay, Monday night this person versus this person, and these are their own stories. It's like, you want hard-boiled eggs or scrambled eggs, and that's it. And if you have an idea for a different way of cooking eggs, you're shut down, or you're kind of, you trigger one of the sides, or you're not being a good leader. And so I find it really, I think people have to, I know the relationship with media and politics and entertainment, one was alluding to it earlier, but there was a time, at least when I was growing up, people knew the distinction between entertainment and politics and socialization, right? They were different. There was clear structure, but now it's like it's all just meshed together. Like we can't tell the difference between entertainment, we can't and politics. What is serious? What is a joke? What is just relationship building and community? I think this is a huge problem for, not just my kids growing up, but it's for me right now, just trying to navigate through what everybody's saying. And we all know that media, right? I learned this in school. It's entertainment, and if there's a saying, if it bleeds, it leads, right? So meaning they're going to present the most provocative, most entertaining way of doing things. But is that a good way of educating people on serious matters that affect, taxes and morals and government leadership? And, so I find everything to be so, there's a lack of cohesion, a little bit like the Wild Wild West.
Yeah, I think that's totally it. Because like you said, back in the day, I think there weren't as many voices. Like media, there were just very established media channels that had, the majority of people's views. And there were, just a certain number of people who had a lot of influence, whether they be celebrities, politicians, maybe even pastors, right? But I think with this advent of like social media and just so many media channels and just so many avenues for people to kind of get their information, it's kind of flooded the market, right? And so I think for people now, it's like if they want to get attention, if they want to get views, if they want to get known, they have to have that shock value. They have to really take a position that is almost like entertainment in a way, right? It's like, oh man, I can't believe that they're saying that. I can't believe that they believe that. And then people will watch that, right? So I think people are almost becoming like caricatures of themselves, and that, these extremes I think are toxic for, everybody who's kind of consuming media. Everybody's an influencer now, right? And so everybody's voice is out there, and it's the ones that kind of expression that the kind of dog that barks the loudest gets a bone, right? So yeah, I think that's kind of where we've kind of settled in right now as a society, and it is kind of sad to see. And it's kind of, I don't know, where do we go from here? It's kind of is I guess the next question that I would ask.
Yeah. So I'll contribute from a ministry standpoint, or from a pastor and leadership development standpoint, in that I think the solution lies in obviously education. I think the American educational system does not value critical thinking per se. and obviously doesn't have opportunities for diversity and travel on an international standpoint. Whereas, for instance, we were talking about this earlier, but the Canadian educational system is very strong, teaching from an early age conscientiousness and actually how to communicate or how to talk on a international level with people from a different nation. And so just to have that diplomacy, just to have that goodwill, and how to use language that builds bridges rather than tears bridges down. But until we learn to actually talk in a public space where we can give somebody the benefit of the doubt and just listen to them, just the basic thing, no more, no less, and try to give people the benefit of the doubt so that we can actually work together to put our heads together to see that, something you say is actually good and right. And something I say is good and right. How do we defer to each other and work together for the common good?
So I kind of want to bring up this other thing that I think a lot of Christians will kind of struggle with is, nowadays there's a lot of divisiveness that we see from our leaders. There's a lot of just things that they might be promoting that we don't agree with. And there's just kind of this sense of like, we don't trust government, right? And like just what we talked about last time in terms of systemic racism. There are institutions that are led by our governments that might be doing things that are not godly, right? And that we don't agree with. But I think there's a lot of Christians who kind of latch onto this verse, and I want to read it to you guys and get your thoughts on how we should approach, what the Bible is saying, right? So in Romans 13, it says, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who will do so bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror to those who do right, but those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from the fear of one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason.
So, Dawen, did God put Trump in position of power? It was God's ordained, right, buddy?
We laugh, but there is a contingent that believes that believes that the Lord works through strange characters. They fully believe that his unideal character makes him an ideal candidate for his word. There's so many people that
I'm gonna be laughing about that, right? Because just to let y'all know, I'm totally joking. All right, I'm not serious.
Oh wow, that verse, when you were saying that, I got so frustrated because wow, it is really controversial. I could see how a verse like that could be easily interpreted to justify tyranny and dictatorships, so again, like nuance and subtlety and scholarship, when you present a verse like that at length, it needs to be put in such context. I forget, I'm assuming that Paul is the one speaking. Is that right? Is he the one?
Yes.
So and he's, it's so interesting having him go from one identity to another. Just look at who he used to work for as Saul and who he became as Paul. People might think that he's telling everyone to be obedient to the government, but he is, you could say, an iconoclast in his own right, writing from prison and very much subversive. So it depends on the context that you place Paul in, and I'm sure Pastor Drew can tell us more. But man, for me, I don't hear that and say like, oh, because of that, we should not have dissenting opinions at all or express our displeasure with a governing body. That's not what I hear. If the government is doing something seriously wrong, I don't think Paul would be okay with us sitting on the sidelines. That's what I would have to say about that.
All right, Pastor Drew.
All right. I have all the answers. No, I don't. I don't actually, that verse, it's very important, obviously, to be placed in context with the Roman government back then. And there's other occasions where, for instance, Peter in Acts, he says, decide for yourselves if we should obey God or you, basically implying that we shouldn't obey the government, right? So Dawen was right also, that there are occasions where the apostles felt like they had to obey God and because the government, what they were proposing or advocating for was direct opposition to their conviction of what they felt like God was essentially leading them to do. But then the other question is, well, what issues can you decide to obey the government and what issues do you not? And unfortunately, we live in a very sinful, where people also lack the discernment of what is of God and what is not. I actually think that verse, Romans 13, is very relevant and practical, in particular for American Christians. And we all know American DNA is this notion of rebellion. All levels, from the beginning of the forming of the United States, they came because of rebellion, and that rebellious DNA is inside the educational system. It's in the very fabric of American society, where you can't get anything done and you can't hear unless it's in the context of rebellion. And so I think that verse about submitting to authorities, I don't think it means for us today as an American saying, oh, we'll listen to everything that the government says. But I think it is advocating for a different way of collaboration and conversation. Can we submit to the government while making sure that we're keeping the government accountable and honoring the symbiotic relationship between government and community and the individual? So I think that verse is very pertinent for, in particular, American Christians to learn how to influence the government in a way that is godly, without that rebellious, contentious, kick your ass type of spirit that is in many Americans.
I think kind of maybe moving to, let's say, Taiwan politics. I know, Dawen, you mentioned this idea where it's hard for people to kind of have a discourse, maybe disagree on politics and then go have a beer together. I feel like that's something that actually happens here in Taiwan, where people within the same family, they'll be different parties, they'll get into it, they'll like disagree, but at the same time, they'll sit down at dinner together, right? And so, I mean, just maybe give me your thoughts on kind of like the state of politics and how people view politics in Taiwan and how maybe it's similar or different from politics in America.
Wait, I just want to say, you think that you think you've seen people talk about politics and then go share a meal afterwards? That's something that you witnessed recently?
Well, I know it happens, right? Because I know that people, husband and wife, right? They're like different parties. They'll get into it, but they still live together. Like, they still share the same household.
I know that like friends of mine where that applies, they've just avoided the topic altogether at home because it's become so toxic. I was gonna say a lot of parallels. In America, we've distilled everything to a blue and red issue, right, on party lines, and in many ways, things here in Taiwan feel like they're either blue, which is the KMT party, or green, which is the Democratic Progressive Party. So it feels like people have distilled these things into these crude colors. I find it hard. I rarely talk about politics with anyone, whether they're American or Taiwanese. And when I hear about it spoken here, it tends to be coming from one side, which means at the end of the day, I'm sorry, because it means that there's a lot of missing opinions. And I'll just say it. I feel like Taiwan is obviously doing a lot of things that are very admirable among the world, especially with its progressiveness. And there's many things that they're doing right. But on one general level, in terms of party affiliations, not only are we're for better and for worse, we're a two-party system, but oftentimes it feels like we're a one-party system just because the opinions on the opposing side are either silent or have been shut down, or you just don't hear it, especially among people in my peer group. Maybe it says a lot about my peer group, maybe, but I often feel like, oh, we are in danger of becoming just a one-party system, and that regardless of what I think about that party, is just unacceptable to me. There needs to be balance. There always needs to be a balance, and that's something I learned from America. I wish everybody says it too. I wish there could be 3 parties or 4 parties. 2 parties is just too limiting, especially when no one falls cleanly in a certain bracket or in a certain party. Well, I think a lot of it, though, is when you talk about politics in any country, it is super difficult to speak of it dispassionately. And some of my friends wouldn't even want to do that. But it's hard to even be calm. So people come at it already with a lot of passion in it, which isn't wrong. But sometimes that passion can overtake our ability to listen to other opinions. And so that's, I don't know. If I could be an advocate for something, it's to measure the passion with an open ear, so that you can hear and try to understand what someone who thinks differently from you feels, because there's always something, in my opinion, to be gained from it.
Drew, you have any thoughts about bringing kind of that passion and that emotion into politics and kind of that discourse?
So I tend to be I try to be realistic on what actually can be changed. Especially the older you get, you know, the more you kind of see the trajectory and the fruit of your labor, the fruit of your energy. And so I try to focus on things that I can actually make a difference in. So I tend to be more, I don't want to talk about government from a macro level, but just influence, like in small groups and conversation with people that actually respect each other, and we can influence one another and with a heart to learn from one another. So I think solutions is like small groups like this conversation, rather than like mass riots, like trying to mobilize everybody to, you know, have a particular stance on something, you know? So, but one thing about Taiwan politics, as someone that's, you know, ignorant outsider, you know, as someone with daughters, I'm loving the Taiwan president, woman president, kicking some butt, making Taiwan look good. So, so I don't know the ins and outs like Dawen, but I'm happy, you know, from afar. So watching her lead from afar.
Well, thank you both of you guys. Any last thoughts before we wrap it up in terms of how we approach this? I know, Drew, you kind of summed it up very well. It's like, you know, a lot of times there's just something that we can do on a micro level with the people that we talk with, and the way in which we talk with them, and the things that we talk to them about. So Dawen, any kind of final closing thoughts from you?
The only thing that I mean, generally speaking, vote. In America, the election is in November. If you live overseas, you get a mail-in ballot. I've been mailing it in the last 2 elections, and I've participated in the elections in between for the last 2 years. So I've been voting overseas mail-in ballots ever since moving to Taipei. But please register if you haven't registered yet, no matter where you live, and then vote, because that's the best way, at least in the current system that we have, to express our voice. So vote. And then I will be eligible to vote in future elections in Taiwan starting the next cycle. So I'm very excited about that. And as someone that's very interested in that, I will be making sure full use of my civic right. So to vote.
And bang.
Yeah.
Great, guys. Thank you. You know, I do like echo Drew's thought that I hope that we can continue to have this type of, you know, good, conscientious discourse with one another, just having good discussion and being, you know, sensitive to other people's beliefs and other people's thoughts, and just see where God leads us in that. So thanks, guys, for chatting, and we'll see you again next time.
Yeah, thank you.
Turn off that TV, man. The media is entertainment, guys. Remember that.
So true.